In 1963, a man named Blair Elderman was just an ordinary resident of Atlanta, Georgia, leading a quiet life in his modest home. The days were simple, his work was steady, and he shared the house with his wife, Eliza, who meant everything to him. However, the life that Blair once knew began to crumble beneath him after a series of strange, disturbing events. It all started on an average Friday night, when Blair's long, exhausting week finally came to an end. He had been grappling with a great deal of stress, having lost sleep over work issues and his wife's unsettling behavior. For days, Eliza had been distant, withdrawn, almost as if something was pulling her away from him. But no matter how much Blair tried, she refused to talk about it. That evening, Blair tried to sleep it all away, hoping to wake up refreshed and better able to face the day ahead. The moment he laid down, his eyes grew heavy, and he drifted into an uneasy sleep. But just a few hours later, something woke him with a sharp, cold terror. He couldn't place it at first, but there was a feeling, something incredibly close to him, something lurking just beyond his awareness. His heart raced as he slowly opened his eyes, desperate to understand what was happening. What he saw froze him in his bed. A small, hunched figure was staring directly at him. It was about 4 feet tall, its skin dark and shadowed, the figure almost blending with the surrounding night. Its eyes were unsettling, not human, but intelligent, calculating. It was as if it was studying Blair, deciding what to do with him. He could feel the weight of its gaze, a pressure he had never experienced before, an unnerving sensation that seemed to paralyze him. The creature didn't move at first, merely stared, while Blair lay there, completely still, unable to even breathe. Time seemed to slow. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it scurried backward, disappearing into the darkness of the crawl space beneath the house, a space Blair had never given much thought to. The silence that followed was deafening. He lay there, heart pounding, unsure if what he had just witnessed was real or a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. Blair tried to brush it off, but the fear lingered in his chest. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had seen, but there was no explanation. Could it have been a bad dream? Or perhaps his mind was playing tricks on him after the stress of the past few days? But there was more to come. The next day, when Blair returned home after a frustrating day at work, he felt an eerie sensation as soon as he stepped through the door. The house was silent, too silent, but then came the sound, a soft, skittering noise, like something small moving quickly across the floor. Blair's heart sank as he turned to face the crawl space door, which was slightly ajar. He hadn't left it like that. With a sinking feeling in his stomach, he approached the door, his mind filled with dread. Opening it slowly, Blair saw that nothing seemed out of place at first, but the feeling that something was wrong, something was hiding just beyond the space, was overwhelming. His eyes darted to every shadow, every corner. Was it watching him again? He wanted to dismiss it as mere imagination, but the unsettling feeling followed him for the rest of the night. The strange creature was still there, somewhere, lurking in his home. His suspicions only grew stronger the following days, as more unusual things began to happen. The creature never harmed him, never made its presence felt in any way that was immediately dangerous, but its visits were frequent, and each encounter left Blair feeling more and more uneasy. The small creature seemed to take up residence in the crawl space, returning night after night, and Blair was certain it was watching him, waiting. Despite his fear, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He didn't know where to go or who to turn to. The authorities wouldn't believe him. No one would. Days turned into weeks, and Blair's paranoia began to escalate. He moved his wife's dresser in front of the crawl space door, hoping to block whatever was lurking inside from coming out. But no matter how he tried to fortify the house, he always returned to find the dresser moved, as if the creature had simply pushed it aside. His once calm and rational mind began to crack under the weight of the constant fear. Blair's anxiety worsened, and he began drinking more heavily to cope with his growing terror. But nothing worked. No matter how much alcohol he consumed, the creature remained, an ever-present nightmare that haunted him day and night. Blair was losing his grip on reality. Was he going insane, or was something truly unnatural happening in his home? Then one evening, something far worse happened. Two young men appeared at his door, introducing themselves as missionaries. They spoke kindly to him, asking if they could come inside. Blair, still in a strange mood, agreed, desperate for any distraction, even though he wasn't in the mood for talking. After a brief conversation, he stepped outside to take care of his fishing catch, needing a moment to clear his mind. But as he stood in the yard, a horrible scream rang out from inside the house. Blair rushed back inside, his heart racing. What he found would haunt him forever. One of the missionaries was struggling as his legs disappeared into the crawl space. The other man was gone entirely. Panic surged through Blair's chest as he realized the creature had claimed them, just as it had seemingly claimed his wife. Blair stood there, frozen in fear. The nightmare had escalated from something personal to something much darker. Desperation flooded him as he wondered what had truly been happening in his home. He couldn't explain it, but he knew that the creature had a purpose, one that involved him, his wife, and now these two men. And as the days dragged on, Blair found himself losing his grip on reality even further. Little did Blair know, the true horror was only just beginning. Blair couldn't escape it. No matter how hard he tried, the feeling of being watched never left him. Each night, as he lay in bed, he could feel the presence of the creature, its cold eyes always on him, always waiting. His mind, once logical and steady, was now a tangled mess of paranoia, fear, and confusion. He couldn't tell anyone about what was happening in his home, not because he didn't want help, but because he knew no one would believe him. He had seen the way the authorities had brushed off his concerns when Eliza went missing. What could he possibly say to make them understand that something supernatural was at work? The days blurred into one another. Blair became a shadow of the man he once was. He drank heavily, trying to drown out the thoughts and the terror. But the creature still found him, night after night. It never harmed him. It never spoke. But its presence was unbearable, always lurking just beyond his vision, always crawling back into the crawl space when it was done. Every time Blair would lie there in the darkness, helpless, unable to sleep or move, knowing that whatever this thing was, it wasn't going to stop until it had its way. But then, things took an even darker turn. It was a month after the missionaries disappeared when Blair noticed something strange. The house seemed different. The walls felt colder, the air thicker, and there was an undeniable stench in the house. A smell he couldn't place, something decayed. He tried to ignore it, but the smell was persistent, like rotting meat that wouldn't leave. The bloodstains began to appear, first small splotches on the floor, then larger smears across the walls. They seemed to appear overnight. And then, as if mocking him, the word "more" appeared, written in blood on the living room wall. Blair's heart sank. More. What did it mean? It was only when he stumbled across a torn piece of clothing, soaked in blood, that he realized the full scope of the nightmare he was trapped in. Something was feeding, something was taking and leaving behind remnants of its victims. But the worst part, he could never escape it. The creature would never let him leave. As Blair spiraled deeper into his fear and paranoia, the creature's visits became more frequent. It was as if it was feeding off his terror. He could feel its eyes on him even when he couldn't see it, its presence a constant shadow that stretched over every corner of his home. Blair had to confront it. There was no other choice. He couldn't live like this anymore. But what could he do against something so terrifying, something that seemed beyond human understanding? One evening, as Blair sat in the living room, nursing his latest bottle of whiskey, the doorbell rang. It was late, too late for visitors. But when Blair answered it, he was greeted by two more strangers. They introduced themselves as investigators, asking about the strange occurrences that had been happening in the area. Blair didn't know if he should be relieved to finally talk about the horrors that plagued him, or if he was making another mistake. In a haze of panic, Blair invited them in. But as he began to speak, telling them about the creature and the disappearances, the situation took a turn for the worse. One of the investigators, a man with a stern face, suddenly went quiet. His eyes grew wide as he looked toward the corner of the room, his gaze fixated on something Blair couldn't see. The other investigator turned pale. Then, without warning, the man who had been staring at the corner let out a sharp scream and bolted toward the door. The second investigator followed, but not before they saw it too, an unmistakable shadow shifting in the corner of the room. Blair didn't need to see it again. He knew what they had just witnessed. The creature, the very thing that had haunted him for weeks, for months, had finally revealed itself to others. And when the investigators left in a rush, terrified beyond belief, Blair realized something even more horrifying. He had never truly been alone in the house. Days passed, but Blair's life didn't improve. The bloodstains were becoming more frequent. The word more was showing up everywhere, and the creature's presence was unbearable. Yet it wasn't the physical torment that broke him. It was the mental toll. He was losing his grip on reality. Was it all in his head? Had his mind fractured under the weight of what he had endured? Or was there something truly wrong with the house? Something that had been waiting for him all along? Then in one final act of desperation, Blair did something he thought he'd never do. He went to the authorities and confessed everything. The creature, the disappearances, the bloodstains, everything. He was done hiding it, done pretending that there was anything normal about what was happening to him. But when the authorities investigated, they found a truth that chilled them to their bones. There were no bodies, but the evidence was undeniable. Blood, torn clothing, signs of struggle, and no explanation for any of it. The only thing they could find was the crawl space, where they discovered traces of blood and signs of habitation. Something had been living there, something that wasn't human. Blair's confession didn't save him, though. He was consumed by the weight of what he had revealed. Unable to bear the truth, unable to escape the memories of the creature, he took his own life in the prison cell where he was held, leaving behind nothing but a trail of unanswered questions and an even darker mystery. But it didn't end there. Blair's wife, Eliza, was found years later, a broken shell of the woman she once was. She had been locked away in the crawl space all those years, her mind shattered by what she had endured. When she was found, she could barely speak, only muttering in an unknown language. Experts couldn't decipher her words, but it was clear that whatever had happened to her was far worse than anyone could have imagined. Eliza spoke of being fed by the creature, of being trapped and left to waste away in the dark. But she couldn't explain how she survived. The truth, however, came out. Eliza revealed that it wasn't Blair who had trapped her. It was the creature. It had spoken to her in a language no one had ever heard before. It had kept her alive in that dark crawl space, using her as food for itself. The horrors she endured were unimaginable, and though she was free from the creature's grasp, she was never truly free from the trauma. The authorities excavated the house, but what they found only deepened the mystery. There were no bodies, just traces of unknown DNA and evidence of something far darker than anyone could understand. The house was eventually bulldozed, replaced by a new family, but no one could escape the curse that haunted it. Months later, the new family vanished without a trace. Blair and Eliza's story, the terrifying events that had occurred in that house, would remain one of the most chilling mysteries to ever haunt Atlanta. A dark tale of a creature from the unknown and the unrelenting terror it brought to all who dared to live in its presence. And as for the crawl space, it remained an unsolved enigma. What had lived there? And why did it choose to torment those who crossed its path? The answers remain lost to time, but the fear it left behind will forever haunt the dark corners of Atlanta's past.